Well, as we're live, I'm going to say hello. I'm Jane Wells. I am the founder and executive director of 3 Generations. And today is July the 30th, and it is International Day Against Trafficking in Persons. And it's also International Friendship Day. So I'm delighted to combine the two things here and welcome back our longtime friend of 3G and myself, Nikolaos Alkhadra, who is a sex trafficking survivor. So what could be better? Yeah. Welcome, Nick. Friendship and sex trafficking, they go together like what?
Yeah. Well, I mean, some of my longest relationships actually last since I was in my life.
Good. Just as we start, I wanted to say that I think it's important to remember that sex trafficking is something that happens every day of the year, right, in every country in the world. And, you know, we tend to talk about it on certain days, around the Super Bowl today, but it is a daily occurrence. And we know that it is the second most lucrative illegal business in the world, with an estimated value of about $150 billion a year. And what we also know is that men and boys make up about 30% of the victims, and yet they probably get about 5 or 1 or 0% of the conversation, which is why it's so great to have Nick here to talk about his experience.
You know, you brought up like the things about it being a $150 billion like industry, which I know is like talking points that they do, but I actually think it makes up 20 to 30% of our economy. When you think of like hotels that get rented, when you're in life, you have to like regularly buy clothing, regularly get your hair and nails, all of that. You know, like all of the money that's spent on personal grooming. Like an elevated sense of person.
And that's something that I want to come back to a bit later, is how much our sort of popular culture, the media, feeds into not only what people have to look like when they're trafficked, but also how conspiracy theories abound on this subject. You know, we at 3 Generations, we talked about the experiences of girls and women extensively, or more extensively, in our film Tricked. But we've really touched on the experiences of boys in our conversations with Nick. So I thought maybe, Nick, you would just briefly talk about how long you spent in the life and being trafficked. And
yeah, I was in a life for almost 6 years. I was trafficked from like high school age to my early 20s. I had 5 pimps total. I also did independent work. All my pimps were white men. I mean, these are just like general things that like, because there is like this myth of what a pimp looks like. You know, it's usually like painted out as this racist stereotype of an African-American male, yada, yada, yada.
But that was not your experience at all, was it? No. So your pimps tended to be white men. And, you know, maybe that's a good segue into some of these conspiracy theories around child sex trafficking and pedophilia, which seem to be abounding right now. Specifically, I guess a lot of this began around Pizzagate in 2016, before that election, and that somehow got revived recently around Wayfair. And I think Nick and I found ourselves on a Facebook chat with conspiracy theorists about this. I think that, you know, first I just do want to say that I think we can all agree that well, the conspiracy theories are appealing and engaging up to a point, and up to the point where they actually do they actually do harm and damage. And in this particular case, we know that around the Wayfair conspiracy actually did a lot of harm to the National Human Trafficking Hotline, which is why we have the numbers scrolling on here, because they were so inundated with with these conspiracy theorists, none of whom were really calling in about specific cases, and it prevented Polaris Project, who run that trafficking hotline, from doing their work of actually trying to protect children and from sex trafficking. And that was really where I started to take issue with some of the people. So do you just want to weigh in a bit on that, Nick?
My God, they're trying to say that like they would have a cabinet that was overpriced, and then they're trying to link it to like missing children, and it was just, I mean, it was like a nightmare. But they ignore like the exploitation going around them. Like they ignore the hostros that are in their communities. They, I'm like, I remember I said to like somebody, like there's so many people on those little threads, but I was like, well, you're ignoring the women that you call drug addicts, or men that you call drug addicts. But you're looking for something that's really not there, but when something is really truly there, you ignore that. You're going for like this false, sensationalized, taken kind of aspect.
That, I mean, just to talk about the film Taken, and the sort of this fear that of abduction and people being swept off the streets and put in wardrobes and closets and shipped through Wayfair or Amazon or whatever. Statistically, we know that about the majority of people who are trafficked are actually people who run away from home or foster homes, or are abducted by family members or people they know. And it's probably less than 1% of trafficked people who are literally snatched off the street. So it's really a tiny problem in a much bigger problem globally. And that's, again, it's like the sensational seems to get people's attention, which maybe isn't a bad thing if it gets the attention to try and solve the problem and do good. What we see again and again is that people actually are not concerned with helping individuals, which is, I guess, what you do now, right, Nick?
Yeah, and that's one thing I touch on too, like when I do share my story is, yes, in the beginning, I was snatched off the streets. However, because of being a throwaway youth, I would have ended up in prostitution regardless. And I stayed in prostitution after I ditched my first pimp.
So would you just talk generally a bit more about that journey from throwaway, runaway, homeless to prostitution and trafficking, just so people can really understand how that happens and
how fast it happens? I mean, you think about, okay, like you run away from home or you're kicked out of your parents' home. It's like, it only really takes, because like in a matter of hours, you're like, oh, where am I going to house myself? How am I going to eat? How am I going to essentially live? And that's where, like, they said, I think, what is it? FBI puts out that thing about the 48 hours thing, or one of them. I think it's less than that, because it's when you hit those, like, dire needs. Well, like, predators pick up on that vulnerability.
I mean, that's sort of the universal entry, or the point, isn't it? People who are vulnerable are people most likely to be trafficked. Okay, so we have a question here about how did you first find yourself first involved and lured into sex trafficking?
First time I found myself involved in it was when my parents kicked me out for being gay. I had came into like the gay area of Chicago. I parked my car, went over to like talk to some, I met like some other kids and some like other street kids. I went back to my car to get something, and when I was digging around searching for like something, I had my back to the sidewalk and the door was open. And that's when I got snatched up by my first pimp, German Robert.
What do you I mean, you sort of say I got kicked out of my home for being gay. I mean, do you want to just talk a little more about how that is and what that feels like and how you reconcile that?
So, when my dad found out that of my sexual orientation, my father had like a complete like breakdown of like, take your faggot ass and move to San Francisco. I hope you get AIDS and die. I mean, it was just pretty like straightforward.
So would you say that of the gay street kids that you've met when you were in the life and now doing social work and outreach, would you say that the issue of being kicked out of home because of sexual orientation is the biggest predeterminant for that?
I think so. Like, I mean, from what I remember, like my friends' stories, and then kind of listening to some of them that I've done like some outreach with or outreach to, and I've noticed, you know, like a lot of common threads.
So
there's a lot of like studies out there that are backing what I'm saying.
And now that you've studied psychology and you're a trained psychologist, do you think that it could, if you knew then what you know now, the outcome might have been different, or do you think it was just inevitable in your journey?
It was inevitable.
How would you tell us a little bit about how you've managed to sort of restore your equilibrium and sense of self and pride? And
lots of therapy, because I mean I've had so much PTSD, not even just from like, you know, I've had like some generational trauma because of some things that happened to my grandparents. Then I also too had just childhood trauma growing up of like going through like the whole like beat the gay out method of parenting and stuff like that.
So we have a question here. Do you find there's a higher rate of trafficking in the LGBTQ community?
I honestly think so. Like, I mean, disproportionate numbers, but a lot more than what is reported. That makes sense, because a lot of like the reporting that they do, like the statistics, they base that on arrests.
Yeah, of course. Okay, so I keep seeing the hotline number going across the bottom here, and you know, one of the things that I feel like I've learned along the way is that it is important for people when they think something is amiss or somebody may be trafficked to actually look for the signs and to do something about that. And you know, back to the conspiracy theories, seems like there are hundreds of thousands of people. I think I read there was something like 18 million, you know, hashtag interactions around these pedophilia fantasy rings. And I'm just curious why you think it is that, you know, truth is stranger than fiction, but somehow people are sort of obsessed by these sort of weird pedophilia sexual fantasies, and yet they don't actually want to do something about the real problem.
Well, and then, okay, like speaking of the pedophilia things, watching the Epstein documentary, because like, you know, like I did street prostitution, but then I also did like high-end escorting. That is how high-end escorting works. It's like kind of like a word of mouth type of thing, and you know, like you have like the recruiters and how they just kind of like mold you into it. You like like that had the most, I think, like that would be like something where like if they want to know how the elites work, watch the Epstein, because that's really how they work.
So you thought that was a pretty accurate depiction of that world. Okay, and then that leads off into all sorts of other theories about how, you know, the entire Democratic Party is somehow caught up in it. And which probably does a disservice to the truth when it comes to, certainly does a disservice to the truth when it comes to politicians and what's really going on. I mean, I guess that what's also happening is that there are thousands of people preying on children and young people who are not Jews or politicians or or part of the global elites or Hollywood or Ellen DeGeneres or any of the other people. They're just normal people all over America and the world. So do you want to talk about the average John, just so people understand who that might be?
The average John, I mean, now I'm just going to speak from my experience. Mm-hmm. The average John is a middle-aged white man. Mm-hmm. He could be anywhere from a plumber to doctor to lawyer. Mm-hmm. I mean, I've heard that there are other races that buy prostitutes, but I've never really, that's not my experience. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and that middle-aged white man could be of any religious background, any political party, any profession. Yeah. So the message is, look no further than your own community when you're looking for, for people preying on young people. Were there women involved in the trafficking leadership is a question here.
There are women involved in it. I mean, but not in mine, mm-hmm. but in general. Mm-hmm. I mean, madams.
Mm-hmm. So the idea of the woman controlling young girls is not just a fantasy; it's a reality. Then,
right?
Yeah. Okay. So I wanted you to talk a little bit more about how it makes you feel when you see people on social media sort of rounding off about crazy.
I foam at the mouth.
Okay, tell us more.
It makes me very, very angry. Mm-hmm. I mean, I've been very happy with my friends that have known me for years that have not posted any of that. Because they've heard me talk about it for years. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. So how do you think, I mean, what are the truths you think that we should be sharing and talking about and disseminating rather than these myths?
Look at figuring out ways, treat the person that's out on the street like a human. Mm-hmm. Don't throw trash at them. Mm-hmm. Don't shoot them with paintballs. Mm-hmm. I mean, these are things that are actually happening to people out there. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So, just thinking about what's happened since the pandemic, do you think that's having an impact on trafficking and on street prostitution in this country?
I think some of it's going up. Mm-hmm. I think people are going to more desperation.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I mean, I read something that one of the reasons that some of these conspiracy theories may be taking hold right now is because people are stuck at home and they have more time to go down the rabbit hole of social media and TikTok and Facebook and Twitter and sort of share these ideas. But it seems to me that where it gets especially dangerous is where our leaders and people in positions of power seem to share those conspiracy theories as well, because it gives them a legitimacy that maybe they don't deserve.
Who's been sharing in power? Who's been sharing the Wayfair thing?
Oh, in power, I can't speak to that. I was looking at that woman, Dr. Stella Emanuel, which was the video that Donald Trump.
Oh, the demon one?
Sorry?
The one with the demons?
Yeah, the demon lady. And one of her theories is that that gay marriage leads to child marriage and child sexual abuse. I thought that one was quite interesting. So I wondered what your response to that one was.
It's just.
It's kind of is it insulting? I mean, it is insulting.
Yeah, it's insulting. Yeah. But I mean, the other thing too is like, is that person saying outrageous things to get attention?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I have a question here, which is, what is a truth you wish people knew about sex trafficking and the people who've been victims of it?
I think the truth is how we can emerge from it, and we're able to kind of we've pulled ourselves out from it. Mm-hmm. If that makes any sense.
Mm-hmm. Of course.
We're not poor defenseless victims. Even when you're being victimized, you still kind of fight back.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So what are some of the proudest moments you've had over the years of exiting from the life and building up your community and your sense of self?
Some of my proudest were graduating college. Mm-hmm. Continuing working towards my master's, and then eventually looking at a PhD of some sort. Mm-hmm. I also too doing the outreach. Mm-hmm. Being able to go into an area where I used to buy drugs and how was involved in that aspect of it. Mm-hmm. And not getting triggered where I go into my addiction. But I mean, my drug part of my addiction. And then the other part of my addiction was the actual prostitution itself. Because it really fed into my ego.
Mm-hmm. Can you explain that a bit more?
Getting paid. So we're talking almost 20 years ago. Mm-hmm. Getting paid anywhere between 500, sometimes a couple thousand, 500 an hour, and knowing that this man has a lot of power and they're giving me quite a bit of money. Mm-hmm. 500 back then was actually pretty good money. And then you get addicted to the chaotic things of it. There's violence in it. You get addicted to that too. Mm-hmm. There's so much of it.
Do you tell me a little bit more about your outreach work and what you think you offer as a survivor that other people may not be able to offer?
I think it's what does make it, when you're able to tell the person, hey, I was in the life too, mm-hmm. If you're passing out the condoms and you're engaging in that rapport. Mm-hmm. And then being able to see, yeah, I can't, this isn't just it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, back to our favorite subject, which is conspiracy theories, or one of our favorite subjects. I mean, it does make you angry. We laugh about it. I joke. We're a little flippant about it. But that was sort of the impetus for us talking today. And I just wondered if you want to say a little bit more about that and what you want people to know about how it impacts you, how it impacts others, and those who are actually victims.
When people are buying into a false narrative, they're ignoring the actual truth. Mm-hmm. They aren't realizing that, okay, a truth. 75 women in the Chicago area over a period of 20, since like the early 2000s, have been murdered by a serial killer. And the cops are not saying that it's a serial killer, but it's usually women who are engaged in prostitution, strangulation or asphyxiation, and then discarding their body into like a dumpster. And so when they're going on to these false narratives, they're ignoring the truth, which is the death of these women.
So obviously you would like to have those cases opened and reopened.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Along with the victims' families, I've noticed.
Yeah. I mean, and this is very much the same issue as the missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls movement as well. So there's a lot of ignoring of, there's a sort of sense of the throwaway people who we know are being victimized. And then on the other hand, there's this sort of big global fantasy about these children who are somehow in closets being shipped in containers, God knows where.
Well, because it fits into this narrative that has been the entertainment, like anytime the entertainment business puts out a movie of about trafficking, I'm like, no.
So
no.
Okay. So in that case, the Epstein documentary actually you thought was so.
Well, I'm talking about like sensationalized movies, like Cage No More, the one with Kathy Gifford.
Do you think these types of conspiracy theories hurt the credibility of those who are really trafficked?
Yes.
Yeah. So
because when we actually share our stories, it's like then they don't believe what happened to us. Because well, that's not trafficking, because trafficking looks like this. And we're like, no, like it's not that obvious. Like that's a kind of, it's like I said before, when you're ignoring the obvious and looking for this sensationalized end, you're harming those that are being actually victimized.
Absolutely. Well, that's really important, and thank you for reminding us of that, because I think it's so important that we understand how truly harmful these things are. And that's what really struck me about Polaris's response to the Wayfair one, because they could see this inundation of people calling the hotline with non-tips, with theories rather than actual tips. And I guess this, if they reported 8,248 sex trafficking cases last year via the hotline, those are potentially 8,000 people who wanted help and could be helped.
Right.
If someone was listening to this, as we get to the end, I wanted to sort of think about 3 different types of people who in the ideal world would be listening to us. One would be somebody who may be caught in the life and a victim of trafficking. What advice would you give to them?
If they're trying to like exit, start making whatever takes up all your money, reducing that, like harm reduction. And then of course with that, then you're taking less tricks. I mean, but then that too is if you have choice, like to leave. Okay,
then the second category is anyone who might be listening who is thinking about purchasing sex from a trafficked person or someone in the life. What would you say to them?
So I'm gonna have to make it clean.
Cleanish.
You're not a helper. you're really not a helper, because that's one of the things that they try to say.
Oh, really?
A helper.
Okay. Could you expand upon that concept a little?
Well, tricks will say things like, "Oh, I'm helping them by giving them money for sex." Mm-hmm. Otherwise, they wouldn't have a place to live, like that type of thing.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So you're not a helper. And then the third category of person, we can only dream that they actually care what we think, is those who do peddle in these conspiracy theories. What would you say to them?
Look at your own community.
Mm-hmm.
Look, if you want to go down a rabbit hole, start researching how many serial killers we have roaming in every state that are targeting prostituted people. Mm-hmm. You really want to go after that.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that, obviously serial killers targeting prostituted people has been around since Jack the Ripper, yeah, and forever, it seems, in the culture. Do you think that, why is that?
Well, because they know, well, we're not going to go to the police, mm-hmm, because the way the laws are set up. Mm-hmm. How society treats people that are prostituted. Mm-hmm. I had a few tricks where I think they probably were. But I just followed my instincts, like pretending like I was going to throw up to get out of the car. Mm-hmm. When I had like a really kind of like the death, I call it like a death vibe or whatever. Mm-hmm. Because like when you're out in that lifestyle, you end up, your survival instincts become super heightened. Because you're living in basically a trigger. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. The whole flight or flight thing. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. In times where I like ignored it, I was held hostage for 2 days. So the minute you let your guard down, you become vulnerable in a different way to an even worse kind of predator. Right. Wow. Amazing. Okay, well, so we need to look at cases of missing, murdered men and women who've worked in the life and try and find more serial killers. That's one message we're taking away from this conversation. Yeah. Yeah. And the fact that we have so many of them running rampant. Mm-hmm. And the police, personally, I feel like the police are not doing their jobs. Mm-hmm. They're not investigating it. How can you explain allowing, like, what was it? I think it's Long Island, isn't it? Where they had that dude was like 50 some or like really high number for 15 years, and they still haven't caught the guy. Yeah. Do you think that legalization of prostitution would help with the murder rates? I think rewriting the laws around prostitution. Mm-hmm. But that's something where, like, I think both survivors and those in the life need to kind of like work out things as to dictate like how to write the laws, because it really has to like be written by, well, it has to be advocated by people that have actually been affected by it. Mm-hmm. Did you think about going to law school? No. I think I ask you that every time, don't I? What? I think I keep asking you that question. Well, Nick, it's probably getting close for time for us to wrap up, but I do want to thank you again. And what else, your parting words today, what else do you want us to know and share? I guess my parting words is just really like people to develop like compassion for those that are out there. Like, whether they're heavy into addiction, whatever it is that they're going through that's breeding them into it, actually having compassion for that person. And not, I really want to stress this, stop throwing trash at us.
Literally. Yeah, I mean that.
I mean, the whole thing of like shooting paintballs at people is just so extreme, you know. And it's even, I think it's even worse than when I was out there.
Okay, all right, duly noted. Well, I want to thank you and thank those who listen. And
everyone who's listened. And thank you, Jane, for having me on.
Yeah, and you know, anybody wants to hear more of Nick's story, you can find that on our website at threegenerations.org. And yeah, go and rent our film Tricked, which really addresses the trafficking issues for girls and women in this country. And Nick's story, What About the Boys, is there too. So thank you, and we'll keep talking.
Okay.
Okay, thanks.
All right.
Happy Friendship Day.
Yeah, happy Friendship Day.
Yeah, okay, take care.
Yeah, you too.
Bye.